Welcome back. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy here for the Daily Blob, and if I have one message for you, it's don't be racist. And if I have another message for you, it's if you are going to be racist, at least be competent about it. Oh boy, remember a few years ago when we were gonna teach the Chinaman a thing or two, right? The Chinaman got uppity. We said that their society had progressed far enough. Therefore, we were telling them you shouldn't go any further because we feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? We blocked them from using our smartphone processors. We're currently trying to block them from using our AI chips. And for Huawei back in 2019, we said you're not going to be able to use the Google Android OS for your smartphones. Google may have just killed Huawei's bid to become the world's top smartphone brand, and that was back in 2019. To quote the wisdom of that bygone time, for millions of users outside of China, being cut off from Google's apps and services, quote, kills the attractiveness of Huawei phones, said IDC analyst Brian Ma. Quote, it kills the usability of a Huawei phone outside of China, thus rendering them dead in the water, he said. Chinaman goes too far. Chinaman gets uppity. We smack them down and say, you can't use our technology anymore. And so how's that going for us? Well, Huawei is looking to surpass the billion user mark with its HarmonyOS next operating system, as it can no longer use Microsoft Windows. So basically, now a few years later, they're coming on almost a billion users of their own Harmony operating system, and they're about to lose access to the Windows operating system. So now, not only are they going to use their own operating system on smartphones, on smart TVs, on watches, and the whole 9 yards, but they're also going to be deploying it to good old-fashioned computers. And just between you and me, don't let Orange Man know that I said this, but I gotta say, if you haven't taken a look at the Harmony OS, it doesn't look to be a bad operating system. So an important thing to understand when we start talking about HarmonyOS is that this is not a Linux distribution. I originally thought this was a Linux distro, and that's what people think of normally when they think about a new operating system, right? Ubuntu or Arch or Mint or one of those. Basically, these are distributions of Linux. So the kernel is the software that's basically interacts with the hardware, the RAM and the CPU and all of that kind of stuff. Generally, there is a Linux kernel that most of these operating systems use, and then they just add their own software on top of that. The curious thing about this with HarmonyOS is that it actually is its own complete operating system. It has its own kernel, it has its own tech stack, so this is not the same thing as Linux. Why that's important is because it's not Linux. That means you can't natively run Linux applications directly on it, right? So when you deal with an Android device, or you deal with, again, Ubuntu or any of that, those are all running Linux as the main operating system. Again, it's a different flavor of Linux, so it's relatively easy to basically port or write software that will run on these different flavors of Linux. When you get entirely different operating systems, so we talk about different operating systems, that's Windows, that's Unix. Unix and Linux are different things, right? The thing is they use different kernels, again, communicating with the hardware layer, and therefore, if you're going to write software that's going to run on these different operating systems, you have to go through this, what's called the porting process, where generally you have to recompile or re-encode the software for each different operating system that's going to run on, and that's a big pain in the ass. That's a big deal. In the mobile OS world, again, we have iOS and we have Android. Android. There's also Tizen, a couple of other ones out there. But basically, again, those are entirely different operating systems. I think it's Kotlin you use for Android, and it's Swift you use for iOS. And then there's some software out there such as React Native or Flutter that allows you to code once, and then basically it will compile the code that you created for the different mobile operating systems into different files so that they can be used on those different OSs. So one of the important things to understand is when we talk about an entirely different operating system, a different kernel, this is separate from a lot of the world that we've been dealing with. Why this can be important going forward is for technology professionals, you have to decide what operating systems that you're going to support, right? Do you support iOS? Do you support Android? Do you support Windows? Do you support Mac? Do you support Linux? Right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. And that's one of the reasons we run into legacy applications in the technology world, right? So if somebody deployed some piece of crap a decade ago, it's a pain in the ass to manage. It's a pain in the ass to administer. Everybody hates it, but it's one of those things you keep using it because you have been using it for 10 years. Again, why is your company still using Windows and Microsoft? Probably because they've always been using Windows and Microsoft. Why are they using Gmail or something like that? Probably because they've been using it for 10 or 15 years. Once you get locked into these ecosystems, you're stuck in those ecosystems for a long time. So what becomes interesting here, when you look at the Chinese market truly diverging from the American market in the technology world, one of the curious questions that's going to come up is what is their architecture going to look like? What are their systems going to look like? What does it do to our technology industry if the overall technology world literally fractures and some of the world is using architectures and systems that look nothing like what we're using? Again, one of the nice things, becoming an MCSE, a Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, back in 2000, is that everybody used Microsoft equipment back then, right? It was basically you used Intel servers and desktop computers with Windows on them. You had Windows servers, and then you had Cisco equipment, right? So basically you get your A+, you get your MCSE, and you get your CCNA, and you could work anywhere, right? You could work in a hospital, you could work in a military establishment, you could work in a logistics system, you could work for an interior design firm. Everybody used the same crap. Again, one of the curious things in 2025 is, there's so many tech stacks nowadays. There's just so many tech stacks nowadays. And that's actually a problem, like figuring out what product you're going to deploy, or what product you're going to support, or what you're going to learn in order to support or deploy becomes a really big issue nowadays. And what becomes interesting now is what happens on a global scale if geographically we start separating the types of architectures that we use. Again, when I got my MCSE in the West Coast, generally folks used Novell back in 2000, and on the East Coast used Microsoft. Novell died a couple years later. Again, Microsoft was good, but that was the thing. So if you were in California, you might want to learn Novell. Again, if you were in New York, you learn Microsoft. Later, when you look at Ruby on Rails or PHP, for whatever reason, East Coast loved PHP. If you were east of the Mississippi, PHP was the technology to learn. If you're west of the Mississippi, Ruby on Rails was the technology to learn. They basically did the same crap, just a little bit differently. And that was it. It was just a geographic thing. What becomes curious now is what happens when we have this on a global scale, right? If you are west of Hawaii, you learn HarmonyOS, and if you're east of Hawaii, you learn Ubuntu or something like that. Again, that's one of the curious things to be thinking about when we start thinking about this divergence of operating systems at the nation-state level. So let's take a look at this article. Huawei's software ambitions are rapidly expanding. Their software ambitions are expanding. What began as a survival strategy in response to US sanctions has evolved into a bold initiative to position HarmonyOS as a dominant operating system across smartphones, tablets, TVs, and soon PCs. Again, this is what I talk about when we talk about racism. One, don't be a racist. But two, if you're gonna be a racist, be an effective racist, for Christ's sakes, right? And that's one of the issues we have with America dealing with China. We keep telling them, boy, you better stop. And then they don't stop because they don't really like how we're dealing with them, right? And that's one of the issues that we're getting to with them. Again, we stopped them from using the smartphone processors, Huawei from using the smartphone processors. Now they have their own smartphone processors. We're trying to stop them from using AI processors. They're building their own AI processors. We try to stop them from using an operating system. They build their own damn operating system. It's kind of funny, you know, a nation with 1.2 billion people that is the factory of the world and has amazing universities and motivated and dedicated and smart people. It's surprising that when we tell them to stop, that they don't just say, yeah, yes, Mazda, yes, Mazda. They're like, nah, we're just gonna keep going, right? Now aiming to surpass 1 billion users, HarmonyOS is preparing for a new era of computing after Huawei lost access to Microsoft Windows licenses. So basically with the HarmonyOS, they're on version 4 at this point, and so they have about 1 billion users, and this is across their tablets, their phones, and their TVs at this point in time. So basically what's going to happen is they're going to lose access to the Microsoft Windows licenses, and so a funny thing's gonna happen. They're going to stop paying us for valuable technology, and then they're just going to start using their own, and then B, start selling their own. So we are no longer going to make money by selling them the technology, and then they are going to start competing with us. Let's be honest, most likely out-competing us, and so our businesses are going to lose even more money because they're not going to be able to compete. I feel like I feel like the Chinese are reading like The Art of War, and we're reading Baybar. I don't know what's going on here. Originally unveiled in 2019 after 7 years of development, HarmonyOS, known as Hongming in China, was Huawei's answer to being cut off from Google's Android ecosystem. The operating system first appeared on smart TVs and quickly expanded to smartphones in 2021. By late 2024, over 900 million devices were already running HarmonyOS, with that number expected to cross the 1 billion mark soon. This rapid adoption is reflected in Huawei's mobile performance. Its smartphones recently overtook Apple's in the Chinese market share, reaching 19% compared to Apple's 17%. So yes, at this point in time, Huawei are still not selling as many as the Android operating system, their Samsung, but they are beating Apple at this point in time. This growth has laid a strong foundation for Huawei to scale HarmonyOS across more devices as it seeks to unify its ecosystem, mirroring Apple's seamless integration between iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. In March 2025, Huawei's license to use Microsoft Windows expired due to ongoing US sanctions. The company cannot renew the agreement. As a result, Huawei is taking another bold step by replacing Windows with HarmonyOS on its future laptops. And again, just to be clear, when I talk about my frustration with the current president of the United States, here's the deal. The boy won't shut up about the trade deficit, the trade imbalance between the United States and China. Right? China sells more crap to the United States than the United States sells to China. Again, whether that matters, whether it's as significant as he says it is, what we should do about it, those are its own things. But think about this right? One of the last videos I did was talking about how NVIDIA literally had to lose $15 billion in sales because they're not able to sell to China, right? So China wants to buy NVIDIA equipment. They can't buy NVIDIA equipment, ergo NVIDIA lost $15 billion in sales. So again, when we look at the trade imbalance, if we literally do not allow China to buy our crap, how much can we cry? Now we run into the thing, again, with the Windows operating system. like Windows, hate Windows. A lot of people hate Windows, right? It's used on a lot of devices out there. And literally, this is another instance where the government is saying China, man, is not allowed to give us money for this product. And one of the important things to understand, again, especially with Windows, right? Windows allows a lot of other technologies to work on top of it. Again, whether it's web browsers, things like Google Chrome, other stuff that you're going to install on there, a lot of the products that you're going to install are most likely going to be American products. Again, Adobe, QuickBooks, that kind of thing. And so one of the issues that you run into too is not only are we saying you cannot buy licenses to Windows, and so therefore that kills the revenue from the Windows sales, but it also kills all the domino revenue that comes from the other products that would be sold alongside Windows. The company has already showcased a new unnamed laptop running HarmonyOS 5, also referred to as HarmonyOS Next. Unlike previous versions, this edition is no longer based on Android and is fully developed in-house. Huawei is expected to officially launch the device later this month. The new OS supports core productivity tools such as WPS Office and enterprise apps like DingTalk. Thousands of HarmonyOS mobile apps are expected to run on the new laptops, offering users a familiar mobile-like experience on desktop devices. With its large ecosystem expanding smartphones and beyond, HarmonyOS could soon emerge as one of the best Windows alternatives, particularly in regions where access to Microsoft's operating system is restricted or banned. And so you could say that Trump is good at solving problems. He was definitely very good at solving Huawei's problem, right? So one of the big issues, again, you get into the technology world, is the whole issue of buy-in, again, legacy equipment. And the issue is once people start using a certain line of products, they're basically going to keep using that line of product until they're forced not to by something to break them out of inertia, right? So again, I was in MCSE. I loved Windows, right? Windows 2000 was great, XP was great, 7 was great. We're not going to talk about Vista. Vista and Millennium Edition, ME, can all go to hell. But anyways, I was a Windows fanboy for a long time. And then they came out with Windows 8, and Windows 8 was an utter pain in the ass. Again, Vista sucked, but you could downgrade back to XP, so you dealt with it, right? Windows 8 was a pain in the ass, and then Balmer came out and literally told Windows users, this is the operating system, we don't care if you like it or not, you're stuck with it. And that's when I went out and bought my Mac, right? So 2013 is basically when I transitioned over to Mac because Microsoft made their ecosystem such a pain in the ass. I was forced to go out and find a different solution. And the thing is, most of the time, companies aren't going to be that bad. Again, we talk about things like Mac. I will tell you again, the Apple world is not as good as it used to be. Again, their new M-line, computers are pretty good, but there's a lot of issues with their ecosystem. Again, why do I not leave their ecosystem? Because I'm in their ecosystem, right? I've got a watch, I've got an iPhone, I've got the laptop computer, I've even got a HomePod. I like my HomePod. It all kind of works together. Does it work as well as it should? Does my HomePod kind of seem like, has a few mental issues? Yes. But it's not enough of a break for me to, again, want to go off and try to find another ecosystem, right? I'm not going to go over to Android because my HomePod is a bit of a pain in the ass. I'm not going to go to a Windows computer because my M2 Mac is quirky on a couple of things. It's just not that big an issue. And so that's one of the problems that you run into for new upstart companies is they try to get into the technology world, but there's so much lock-in already there. Even if people like your product, they're simply not going to go to it. You think about this with the Windows operating system. So Microsoft actually had a number of mobile operating systems. Again, Motorola Q was my favorite smartphone ever, just to be clear, right? Anyways, they had Windows CE and Windows Mobile and a whole bunch of things. Anyways, they decided to build smartphones that competed with Android and iOS years ago. And I knew people that had the phones and they liked the phones, and the apps that existed on the phones apparently were very good. But It was one of those things. Like people are already developing for iOS or they're developing for Android. You know, nobody was really developing for Windows phones. And so Windows phones didn't have a lot of users. Again, back in whatever it was, 2012, 2013, since they didn't have a lot of users, not many people were developing for it. So again, Microsoft failed at smartphones is simply because they were the third mover and the market was already taken, right? So again, you look at Huawei, again, in 2025 or 2020 when all this started kicking off, and the thought that Huawei would be able to deploy their own ecosystem with their own processors and their own operating system and all that kind of stuff and be able to succeed, that didn't look very likely, right? Because if you want a high-end device, you would go for iOS. If you wanted a low-end device, you would go with Android. Why would you use a Chinese operating system, no matter how good it is? Again, like I say, the Windows operating, I knew people who had the Windows mobile device. And again, they told me, every app on that phone was amazing. Like all 5 of them. If all you needed was 5 apps, Windows Mobile was for you. Anyways, but that would be the thing, right? So if they went out there and they tried to build this new thing, they would run into the issue of like Palm OS. So remember when Palm decided to start doing smartphones? Yeah, that didn't go very well. Again, there's all these different, Samsung tried to create their own operating system and that failed. All these different things. They tried to create their own operating system. And again, they all failed because, you know, everybody's already using iOS or Android. So the curious thing here is, right, Trump came in and he solved Huawei's problem. So basically, Trump comes in and says, look, you're not able to buy our CPUs. You're not going to be able to buy our the smartphone operating system. You're not going to be able to buy the desktop operating system. You are cut off. Well, again, I tell you folks, right? There's options in the world. There's options in the world, right? If my option is Android or iOS or Harmony, I'm gonna go with iOS or Android. That's just how it is. This is how it is. If you say my option is HarmonyOS or nothing, I'm going to pick HarmonyOS. And then you get an interesting thing where you literally build lock-in. So more and more people start using HarmonyOS. That means there's more users on the platform for developers to go after. You get more developers on the platform, the more users want to be on the platform. And pretty quickly, Trump has created a viable technology ecosystem for the Chinaman. So you can say that Trump is very good at solving problems. Unfortunately, he's not solving America's problems. So I think this will be interesting going forward and looking at how architecture changes based off of the different cultures that are developing technology. So one of the things we talk about in the technology world is why diversity is important, right? Going out and talking with different types of people to understand what their problems are. I talk about this with my wife, right? My wife has a menstruation? She has a period calendar. So whenever her time of the month comes, she clicks stuff in that calendar, right? There's suns and there's clouds and there's smiley faces. Not quite sure what the smiley face is about. I don't really want to know, right? Here's the deal. I would never create an app or think about creating an app for basically tracking the menstrual cycle because I don't got one. Right? The thing to understand, again, is in the larger world, there are these same types of problems that people have in different societies. I remember years ago, I went to an Interop conference. Interop used to be great. It's gone now. Anyways, Interop, and they had a Huawei there. So Huawei was creating network, or they're really trying to sell network equipment back at the time, routers, switches, that type of deal. And one of the curious things that they were selling, one of their deals was that their equipment was completely sealed, right? So if you go to Cisco, they have hardened equipment, right? So you can buy the normal Cisco equipment that you throw in a server room, or you can buy hardened equipment, right? And hardened equipment is crap you can like put in Antarctica, right? You basically put it in Antarctica, you power it on, it's fine, right? Polar bears can try to eat the damn thing and nothing's gonna happen to it. The issue is a lot of folks, again, if you go to India, if you go to Pakistan, if you go to places in Africa, Kenya, that type of deal, they don't need hardened equipment. They don't need to spend $5,000 on environmental hardening for networking equipment. On the other hand, they don't necessarily have the server rooms that we have, again, here in the United States. Again, in the United States, if you're a systems administrator and you go to your boss and you say, boss, I need a room in this building that is going to have its own air conditioning, so it's going to have its own climate control, the air is going to be clean, and I need to be able to secure it, right? Almost any business in the United States will be like, yeah, sure, whatever. Again, you might get into a whole argument about where you're going to put the thing and a whole bunch of other stuff. But if you tell that to a CEO in the United States, that's not going to be a question, right? The thing is, right? You go to a lot of other countries, and it's amazing, like how much dirt there's in the air. And again, I don't mean that to denigrate anybody, but again, it's like India. I remember when I was backpacking through India, and in some places in India, there's just it's just like this talcum powder dirt. Like you walk out your guest house at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and you would see these beautiful mountains, like these mountains that are miles away. Just one of the most amazing sights you've ever seen in your life. Holy crap, by 6:30, man, the trucks start moving, the cars start moving, they got their own rush hour over there. Man, you couldn't see 100 feet away. Man, that dirt gets kicked up, and oh, that stuff is nasty. Again, you look at Delhi, right? You look at New Delhi in India, and their pollution is just off the charts. So one of the things to think about, though, is if you have networking equipment in an environment that isn't fundamentally clean, think about how most of our networking equipment is, right? It has fans in it. Most of them have active cooling, and what that active cooling is basically little vacuum cleaners. Air gets pulled in, basically picks up the heat and gets shoved out. Well, that's a vacuum cleaner. So if you're in an environment that has this dust, you have this grit, that has this dirt, that means all of that is getting pulled in to your networking equipment, and it's just gonna stay there. Which basically means your fancy, Cisco equipment you're gonna buy is gonna die pretty quickly, right? Just because it's gonna get, full of a lot of dirt and things. And so the interesting thing is Huawei, basically, their thing that they were trying to sell is that they simply had completely sealed networking equipment. Again, not environmentally hardened, but this is just networking equipment you could put into an office building in New Delhi or in Kenya or in Pakistan, and it would keep running. If the air conditioner fails, again, the stuff will keep running. Why? Because it has these massive heat sinks on it. It's completely sealed, and therefore it's not acting like a vacuum cleaner. And so one of the curious things to be thinking about is that Huawei was designing for the customers that they were going after. They were designing based off of the problems that they see. Those are not the problems that I see here in the United States. Again, if I tell you I'm going to be building a server room for you here in the United States, you are going to give me a clean environment, period. Right? That's how we do things. Therefore, that's how we think about equipment. Again, with Huawei, they were looking at it differently based off of the customers that they were going after. And so what becomes interesting here, right, is in the United States, and especially in the Western world, we have this massive blind spot. Right? There are people that do things the way that people do, and then there's, what are you allowed to say? What are you allowed to say? I mean, I guess they're people. I guess they're people, right? But they've got their own issues that don't look like ours. And so what becomes interesting here is what happens when China starts designing systems based off of the problems that they see. And in this modern world, there's probably more people that deal with those problems or environments that deal with those problems than necessarily are environments that deal with mine. So this could be very interesting to see fundamentally how design may change because of this rift between the United States and China in the technology world. Okay, so what is the takeaway here other than Trump is doing an amazing job of winning for China? Well, one of the things that I'd have you think about, if you are in the West, if you're in the United States, is one of the things you might want to consider is actually learning how to develop for the HarmonyOS ecosystem, right? So basically, if you go and you take a look at it, right, they have a development environment just like Android or just like iOS or whatever else. You can develop apps for them. And something you might think about, right, is as an American, it might be time to start thinking about how to develop apps for that particular ecosystem. I think about this with, I knew some people back in the day that developed applications for the Barnes & Noble Nook, right? So e-readers, right? E-readers, Amazon won the e-reader war, right? But Barnes & Noble, they tried, right? They went out there, they actually created a good device. They created a pretty good ecosystem. Everybody agreed that they were nice devices, nice ecosystem, the whole 9 yards. And then they went home and they read books on their Kindle. Again, that's that whole thing. Like once you own a market, it's very hard to basically disrupt that particular market. So the curious thing was, is I was talking to this development company and they developed for the Barnes & Noble Nook. And I went, well, I mean, again, the product's nice and all, but how do you make any money developing for the Nook? Who the hell uses this product? And basically they said, almost nobody. They said almost nobody. But what happens is that parents, the Nooks were color. So back, so we still really don't have Kindle color ones, but they were color. They're a little bit flashier. They're a little bit easier to use. And so a lot of times parents would buy Nooks for their kids because it would get the e-reader, plus it would give a little bit more of this tablet experience. And so basically what happened is once they bought these Nooks for their kids, they would then go to download an app, buy an app to install. And there were very few apps out there. So basically what this development company did is they created a number of apps for kids. And again, basically, even if there's only a small market, if you're the only people selling to that small market, it can still be a large amount of money. So they actually became very successful selling kids Nook apps so that, once parents bought this thing, they had something to buy for their kids. Right? Again, they're the real world of it. You can make a successful business off of developing for a failed product. Again, business, there's a difference between technology and business. Very important to grasp, right? So anyways, an interesting thing to be thinking about right now with HarmonyOS, right? If you've got a billion users, and you have a massive growth that's coming, right? You know that China is going to be massively pushing HarmonyOS. They're going to be massively pushing Huawei, both in China and outside of China. So one of the things that you might want to consider is learning how to develop for HarmonyOS right now might be a great way to go, especially if you're thinking about the intersection of, again, the quote-unquote Western businesses or the American businesses and the Asian world, right? If you have American businesses that want to get in front of Asian eyes, right? If they're using HarmonyOS, right? Apps are going to have to be created so that they can run the apps on the smartphone, right? The company might have an iOS app. It might have a web app. It might have an Android app. But if they don't have a Harmony app, how many customers are they losing out on? So one of the things that you might consider at this point in time is learning how to develop for the Harmony world so that you can put that shingle up and go, oh, iOS? Man, iOS is 5 years ago. Android? Everybody's bored of Android. I'm actually at the cutting edge doing HarmonyOS. I think that really is something that you should consider. And again, especially like I say, if you're in the Western world, it might be a real value proposition, right? You can be an American company, an American contractor. Developing for the Chinese market, there might be a value proposition there you haven't been thinking about before. And another takeaway for any of my viewers that are non-Americans, one of the big questions that I get from non-Americans that when they do the meetings with me is basically, how do I come to the United States? And it's like, oh boy. Man, that was difficult 5 years ago. I'm not even going to go into it now, right? But there's this big idea, right? To be successful in technology, you have to come to the United States. We got Silicon Valley and we got all that kind of stuff. One of the things I've argued for a long time, well over a decade at this point, is depending on what you want to do in the technology world, it might not actually make sense to come to the United States anymore. Again, if you're a Facebook fanboy or Instagram or Netflix, right? This is really what you want to do. Fine, there might be a reason for you to come. But if you just want to be an app developer, a web developer, network administrator, all this kind of thing, you can be very successful outside of the United States and not worry about our idiocy or our current immigration policy. Oh, golly, our immigration policy is so bad right now. That's just not even funny. It's so bad. So one of the things that you might consider, again, is this new market that's being opened up by the Trump administration for China might be a hell of a value for you, right? Again, think about all the people in the world that don't like the United States right now. Think about all the countries in the world where there are sanctions and other things like that against U.S. products. Products can't go in there, right? If you learn to develop for the HarmonyOS and for Huawei and those types of things, again, that might be another massive value proposition, and really it might be the future. Again, it's important to understand, like when we talk about smartphones, everybody has this idea, like iOS, right? The iPhone was the first smartphone, and that took over the world. And it's like, but it wasn't. It just wasn't. There was this thing called BlackBerry that had been around for a decade. Like, it's really weird. Like now, like whenever anybody talks about the smartphone, they always talk about Steve Jobs and how he invented smartphones. It's like, but he didn't. Again, the BlackBerry had been around for a decade. The Motorola Q, again, used a Windows operating system. Windows CE had been around. Palm came out with their own mobile operating system, right? There are truly a lot of smartphones before the fucking iPhone came out. But in 2025, nobody remembers any of those anymore. They all say that Steve Jobs invented the smartphone. Important thing to realize, again, in the technology world, the major companies of today are tomorrow's footnotes. Again, Yahoo was Yahoo until it was sold, basically, for a tax write-off. MySpace was MySpace, again, until it was sold for a tax write-off. AOL, Kodak, all of these companies were major players all the way up until they weren't. They just weren't, right? Important thing to consider, right? Again, especially what's going on with the United States right now and our whole international policy, how we're pushing China and the whole 9 yards, is there is a real vector, right? There is a real path for China's complete domination of the tech world. Right? And again, that means everything from the hardware and the processors to the operating systems to the infrastructure and the interlinks and all of that kind of stuff. And so it is important to be thinking about right now, like if you're a young person outside the United States, you have to think about that bet. So get back in 2000 when I got my MCSE, I had to make a bet. There was something called Novell Network Administrator or MCSE, Microsoft Systems Solutions Engineer or whatever it was, Systems Engineer. And honestly, I just went with MCSE because, I don't know, it was the one on the door. But again, there's always a bet, right? Thankfully, I went with that because Novell died pretty quickly after that. One of the things that you have to consider, if you're an 18-year-old right now, right, there is a bet on the American technology world ascendancy or the Chinese technology world ascendancy. And you have to make a bet on what you think is going to be most valuable in 5 or 10 years. Once you start hitting the stride of your career, not today, right? You're 18, you're poor today, you're poor tomorrow, you're poor for a couple of years, right? You're 19, you're gonna be poor, you're 20, you're gonna be poor, you're 21, you're gonna be poor. That's just how it works. You're young, you're poor. But anyways, right? You get to be 25, you get to be 28, you get to be 30, right? You have 10 years experience within a certain type of architecture. Which architecture do you think is going to be most valuable in 2035? And I gotta say, as an American, on the stupid ass path we currently are on, I have to say, looking at that Chinese path, looks like that might be the one that will be more valuable for the future. And so that is something to consider. Don't be careful on betting on the current winner. Right? Think about a horse race. Think about a horse race, right? You just had a horse race. You had one horse that won the race. There's going to be another race in a couple of weeks. Do you still bet on that? Do you bet on that horse because they won this race? Or do you look at the environment of the race in a couple of weeks and possibly bet on a different horse? Again, all of this is a bet at the end of the day. It's an educated bet at the end of the day. And I'm just saying, as an American, I'm not sure I'd bet on us. So anyways, what do you think about HarmonyOS? What do you think about Trump winning for China? What do you think the future of the technology world is going to look like in 2035? Put all your thoughts down below. And with that, I'll see you all later.